The world has just observed the one-year anniversary of Russia's illegal attack on Ukraine. Accurate estimates are hard to come by, but we're hearing 200,000 Russian soldiers, 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and 30,000 Ukrainian civilians have died because of this grotesque war. Veteran columnist Diane Francis has visited Ukraine 30 times, and she joins us now for an assessment of where things are at and what's needed to bring this war to an end. Great to have you in that chair.
Thank you.
We are going to start with the President of the United States, who just took a very famous trip to Ukraine, and here's a clip of that. Sheldon, if you would.
You and all Ukrainians, Mr. President, remind the world every single day what the meaning of the word courage is. From all sectors of your economy, all walks of all life. It's astounding. Astounding. Remind us that freedom is priceless. It's worth fighting for as long as it takes. And that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
We'll do it.
Okay, your big takeaway from Biden's trip overseas.
Well, I think he's been fantastic in terms of building an alliance. He's not, put boots on the ground and all of that. He's heard the appeals. He knows the moral cause is correct. And he's pulled together some pretty unruly partners in his coalition. And he's also done it. He's been criticized for salami slicing. In other words, well, I'll give you this, and then I'll give you that, and then I'll give you this. But I think that he had to do that strategically, because to have leaped immediately into an overwhelming flood of weaponry to a brand new army would have scared off Germany and others and said, whoa, and might have pushed Putin into doing something nuclear.
Is there any part of you, though, that when you hear an American president pledge unwavering support and we're not leaving, that you question that at all?
Not this time, not this one.
Because usually
and of course
that's what
that only applies to his tenure.
Yes, but usually when I hear an American president pledging unwavering support, the next thing they sometimes do is waver. And when they say, we're here for the long haul tends to last a lot shorter than most people thought. You worried about that at all?
Not with this guy.
Okay.
I think this is sincere and genuine, and I think it's very moralistic. But there are forces inside the U.S. that are sort of baying at the moon to change things.
Well, there's a I shouldn't say big. There's a chunk of people in the Republican Party right now that want nothing to do with this at all.
The Putin Republicans?
Yeah, you want to call them that? Is that what they are?
To me, they are. They spout Russian talking points. And, if they aspire to run a superpower country, they should pretty much be knowledgeable about, how this sounds and who they're quoting. To say things that they say, no blank check and that sort of thing. I mean, Biden's never said no blank check. And so it's very, it's unhelpful, and it's politicizing, obviously for domestic purposes, which is not a good thing.
Russia and China have been very cozy over the last few years in a kind of anti-American alliance. And here is what you recently wrote about where China is now. Sheldon, the graphic, if you would. China's President Xi pays lip service to peace but subsidizes Russia with oil purchases. Europeans are angry after they have stopped buying Putin's energy at great cost to their economies. They expect Xi to put pressure on Putin to stop this war, and if he doesn't, China's prospects will suffer. The world's silent superpower must finally wade in and end its equivocation. So-called neutrality and trading with the enemy are mutually exclusive. As apartheid fighter Desmond Tutu wisely stated to fence-sitters years ago, to be neutral is to back the aggressor. Okay, what would you like to see China do right now?
China is playing a very careful, cautious, balancing game. And I don't blame them. Look, India's doing the same thing, by the way. And, we don't perceive India as a superpower problem. But it's going to catch up to China in about 10 years, almost, India in size. And they're also buying the oil, and they're buying weaponry from Russia also. So what China is doing, however, is they are hedging their bets. They're doing just as much as they need to do to placate Putin. And they have been outspoken about the nuclear thing, the nuclear threats, and they have proposed a peace idea, which is not going to necessarily go anywhere, but at least they're using the peace word, and they're attempting to do something. So China is not to me anywhere near the problem that Russia is a rogue state run by a maniac. And, you know, China to me is a competitor, a vicious, sometimes cheating competitor in economic matters. But I do not see China as a conquest country.
Do you see them?
If that was in their nature, there would be no Southeast Asia.
No, I get you. Is there a moment, do you think, where Xi puts his arm figuratively or literally around Putin and says, okay, you've made your point, now enough, this has got to end?
I think they have. I think well, to the extent you can do that with Putin, and remember, he's giving you cheap oil and commodities. But he has not agreed to bilateral summits. He has postponed certain initiatives. He's going out of his way not to go out of his way, if you know what I mean.
I do. Here's, let me do another excerpt from one of your columns earlier this month, where you write, now, a year into this catastrophe, it's obvious that Putin's endgame is not triumph, but simply to not lose and to destroy as much of Ukraine as he possibly can. This means the West's endgame must be to demolish his army and regime as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Okay, Diane, how do we do that?
Well, I think providing weaponry to the Ukrainians is absolutely essential. Tightening the sanctions up, which have some loopholes in them, is also essential. And I think also being open-minded, as Ukraine should be, to any sit-down possibilities with Putin to at least stop this war.
Zelensky and Putin sitting down together?
If they leave the Ukrainian territory, absolutely. And I think that has to be the condition.
Does that include Crimea?
Yes.
The whole 9 yards?
That is Ukraine.
You have suggested in one of your pieces as well that Russia could fall apart. It's not beyond the pale that Russia as a state could fall apart. Can you play that out? What does that look like?
Well, what that looks like is that I think there's 46 republics inside the Russian Federation. These are republics with different ethnic groups. They're not white Russians. They're mostly Central Asians. And, you know, they're Tatars, they're Bashkirtis, they're Chechens. These people are Caucasus people. They are completely different people ethnically. And they are bound into this government. And by the way, most of their sons are the ones going to war. He's not recruiting guys in Moscow and St. Petersburg, where the power base lies, and his friends are.
He's raiding the jails, actually.
And the jails, exactly. So each one of these there's about, at present count, 30 separatist movements inside the Russian Federation who are, of course, subject to horrible crackdowns and policing. But those things will rise if the center doesn't hold in Moscow.
Should we welcome a Russia that begins to deteriorate?
Absolutely. I think the Russian Federation, as it's currently constituted and run by the people that it's run by, has to disappear for the sake of the world. The big question is the nuclear arsenal. Who gets control over that, and so on. Now, that was the big question when Gorbachev came along and the Soviet Union fell apart, which allowed Ukraine to leave. The nuclear arsenal situation was carefully handled, and the superpowers were hovering, and everybody got involved in that. So, you know, you don't want some breakaway republic having a bomb, but that's possible. But this is untenable.
I'm sure you heard Mark Milley, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States the other day, say Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically. Is he right? Has Russia lost already?
Oh, absolutely, it's lost. It is really, it's not going to ever be a member of the G20. The regime is discredited. Its economy is being slowly degraded and eroded. While not everybody has leaped onto the American and European bandwagon against him, because only 47 countries are imposing sanctions against him. Yeah. But people are pretty, I think leaders around the world and their publics are pretty horrified at what he's doing to Ukraine. And the pictures are there for all to see. This is very genocidal. This is not just tactical warfare. This is killing women and children.
You've had a 3-decade-long relationship with Ukraine. As the Soviet Union began to fall apart, that was your first trip there. You've gone, as we suggested in the intro, nearly 36 times since then. If this is important enough, if this is an existential crisis for the world right now, should the West be sending ground troops in to help, in your view?
The West can't because of the NATO problem. If NATO is sending troops and its armies directly into this battlefield, then Russia will say they've declared war against us, and then anything can happen. So I think the way it has to be played is the way it's being played. And I think that, the only reason that it's continuing to go on and that Russia is not at the Polish border already is because of Ukraine's courage and absolute refusal. And, when you heard Putin's announcement that he was going to invade and why, chills went up and down your spine if you understood the situation in the history. This is genocide. He wanted to destroy the ethnic group, the language, the culture, not just take the land.
You feel comfortable using the word genocide?
Yes.
Okay, tell me why. Because, I don't know how to say this, but other than genocide has a very broad definition for many people nowadays, and the word tends to get thrown around a lot in circumstances where it's maybe not accurate. I'm not saying that's the case here, but I'd be interested in your thinking on this.
The day of the invasion in my newsletter, I gave the UN a definition of genocide, and I juxtaposed it with his language, his translated language, and it was about destroying an ethnic group. You can't do that. That's genocide.
Short, though, of a degraded military and a country that politically is falling apart, which I appreciate is your most fervent hope for what happens to Russia, is there something, you'll forgive me for putting it this way, maybe more realistic or short of that you think is an acceptable outcome here?
Oh, hey, what I would hope is that the people around Putin either remove him or convince him to withdraw and talk.
And the odds on that, you figure, are what?
Not until he's gone.
Not great. Let's talk about the Olympics. The Olympic Games are happening in Paris, France next year. The IOC says Russian athletes can participate, but they can't participate under the Russian flag. What do you think of what they think is an appropriate compromise for the times?
Well, I think it's totally self-serving and cynical. This faux flag business with no anthem has been what Russian athletes have been competing at the Olympics beneath for a number of years because they dope. They use doping techniques for their athletes, and they cheat. And so they were punished with the faux flag thing. Well, we know what happened in the Winter Olympics in Beijing. The world's greatest figure skater, the 14-year-old girl, was found with doping in her blood system or wherever it was found. So they don't learn. And the other thing is that to allow them to do this is to allow them to use athletes and artists, I would say, as propaganda tools, which is the only positive propaganda tools they have anymore, because people just know what they're doing to a neighboring country that never provoked any violence.
And it looks like Russian athletes will be allowed to participate in those Paris Olympics, despite the concerns of many that they ought not to be there at all. That's certainly your view. What should Western nations do if that ends up being the way it's going to be?
A number of nations, certainly the Baltic nations, and I hope Canada will consider demanding the Olympic Committee ban them altogether from the Games in 2024.
Now you say consider urging a ban. That's not demanding a ban, that's considering.
No, they would consider demanding the ban. They would consider making a demand that the ban is imposed. Now, you can demand it, and if you don't get it, then what do you do?
Then what do you do?
Exactly. In the world of the arts, this is already has occurred. And I wrote recently about one Olympic standard Ukrainian athlete, 22 years old, who was blown up in this war 2 weeks after his birthday on January 1. And he was headed for the Olympics. He will never go to the Olympics. I don't think Russian athletes should go to the Olympics.
But if they do, are you prepared to say that the government of Canada should decline to participate in those Olympics?
That's a big decision
It is.
because it's a big decision because of the training and the costs and the hopes and the aspirations of all our athletes. It's a tricky one, and if the IOC wants to continue to be this way, I think that Canada and other countries should start to withdraw financial support.
Here's the other side of the argument, which I've heard numerous times in relationship to the National Hockey League, which of course has a significant number of really good Russian players in it. And the argument goes like this. We can't really know what kind of pressure the Putin government puts on either those Russian athletes in the NHL or their families back home in Russia to really feel comfortable saying that we should kick all the Russians out of the NHL or we should kick all the Russian athletes out of the Olympic Games. Do you have any time for that theory?
Well, I think that's an interesting one. I think it's valid. There's a very famous conductor, Gergiev, who the Munich Symphony kicked out because he refused to denounce his support for Putin and his invasion. You could demand that these people denounce Putin and his invasion. That's another way to address the problem. Hockey players or pianists or ballet dancers. However, the reality is, to be fair, is if they did such a thing, their families would pay a price in Russia.
That's the thing. I mean, a lot of people...
I think they're blackmailed. I think they're held hostage to it.
Alex Ovechkin, who's obviously one of the great NHL players of all time, he's got a picture of Putin and him on his Instagram page. And a lot of people have been wondering why he continues
That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable.
If he takes it down, though...
Co-branding is unacceptable.
I get you, but if he takes it down, does he put his family back in Russia at risk? That's the question.
I don't know. Likely, but maybe not likely either, because the nicest thing that could happen to Mr. Putin is Ovechkin beats Gretzky's record, and Gretzky was half Ukrainian.
Yeah, Gretzky was from Belarus. His roots go back to Belarus.
Ukrainian and Belarus.
Yeah, okay. You have written, there is no more time for half measures in our support of Ukraine. Fill in the blanks there. What does that mean? Half
measures on the part of some countries. Canada was very slow off the mark, but I think we're sort of catching up nicely. And the Europeans were slow, and they are really catching up. And so I think that that's important. And I think that people should be discriminating in terms of, for instance, if I go to a ballet or a symphony, I'm not going to go if there's a Russian performing. I'm not.
You really know. That's where
Personally.
you have drawn that line in your life right there.
100%.
When you tell your friends that, what do they say?
I don't think it comes up in conversation, but I'm not sure people are as rabid about it. Look, I've lost friends in this war. I care about this country.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You first went to Ukraine, as we suggested 30 years ago, because you know what? You're having a moment, I can tell.
Yeah. Very upsetting.
Should we pause?
No, carry on.
You've covered stories in dozens of countries all over the world. This one has apparently hit you harder than most. How come?
Well, this is the biggest abomination in decades. This is unbelievable. 42 million people, a developed nation, nice people, law-abiding, peaceful people. To be brutalized like this is just horrific. Now, this has gone on all over the world. I'm prepared to, say that. It is a European war, which is why a lot of people in the third world, whose press I read, are not sympathetic and are not joining in that much, because they say, wait a minute, you ignored what's going on in Nigeria or what's in Yemen and so on. So I get that. But for me, this is personal.
Ukraine, sadly, has had a lot of corrupt leadership of its own over the years.
Yes.
Have we indulged in that? Do we have some kind of culpability in that because we just turned a blind eye for so many years as well?
As an anti-corruption activist for most of those years, writing and helping raise money for organizations, let me just explain that the Ukraine had a lot of corruption, politically and economically and judicially, and in their police and so on, but that was Russian influence. After they became independent, they were orphaned. They were not part of the European Union, and Russia decided to get back and stay in control. So they had schemes that allowed them to, it involved the oil transferred through the country. They would skim the profits and give it to Ukrainian presidents, to Ukrainian police, to oligarchs in Ukraine who were friendly. The country was carved up by a man who was married to a Russian woman into oligarchies. So about 1995, it was turned back into, after some years of independence, back into a little mini Russia. And since that time, for 30 years, the Ukrainians have been trying to get out from under the corrosive corruption of the Russian state. And they finally had their first free election, and Mr. Zelensky got elected with a reform platform, and that's why they were invaded. Because it was going to happen, it was going to work, and he would not countenance that.
I'm going to ask you a question here you're really not going to like, but it's okay. You've had questions before you didn't like. There's a body of thought out there that says we have not adequately understood how under the thumb Russia has felt because we've played footsie with the notion of bringing Ukraine into NATO. When the Iron Curtain went down, we almost immediately allowed all of those countries to come into the NATO alliance. And as a result, Russia has, in their view, understandably felt that we've been beating our chests a little too hard in the NATO countries, and they felt very threatened as a result. Do you have any time for that theory at all?
Oh, that's just Russian talking points. They had every right in the world, and they have been very involved in the former satellite states, trying to influence their elections politically, messing around with Europe. I mean, they've had a hand. They have been had a lot of influence whenever they were free to do that. But to take over a country, I mean, that's a little different. There's one thing to persuade, one thing to compete, it's another thing to destroy and invade.
Let's finish up on this. Could you have imagined that the former star of a situation comedy could turn out to be the most impressive leader in the democratic world today?
Well, I'll explain that. I know him. Zelensky was disparagingly described as a comedian. Mr. Zelensky is a lawyer. Mr. Zelensky's father is the most famous computer scientist in Eastern Europe. His mother is a civil engineer. He was an only child. He and his wife built an entertainment empire of many movies, some of which he starred in and some of which he only wrote or produced. He became a millionaire in his own right over many years. This is a very clever man. And when he won election, he brought with him his writing room. And so he has people around him now. This is why the communications are they're unheard of. They're so brilliant and smart. And he has this writing room of intellectuals who say, well, maybe we say this and let's go Zoom this parliament. And so he has conducted a messaging campaign, the likes of which we haven't seen since Churchill, in terms of effectiveness, because that's his expertise.
You would not have necessarily thought that was possible if all you saw of him was the sitcom that he starred in, Servant of the People, which is fabulous, incidentally.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is a very smart man.
As he shows all the time. If people want to read more about this in your column, where do they find? You're on Substack now.
Substack.
So how do they
Just
find
look
that?
up Diane Francis Substack. Google it.
And it's all there. Okay. Diane Francis, your absence from this studio has been too long, and we are really glad to have rectified that here tonight. So it's great to see you again, and be well. And I hope you get to Ukraine again someday. Do you want to go back?
Oh, sure.
You think it's going to happen?
When I can do it safely, yes.
Good enough. Diane Francis.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.